Even weathermen are more accurate than that.
Yeah.
That's not saying much.
That's like my good friend Carl Ebner, who I had on a case for many. It was a great case we had about driving. I think I had like a 9 nanograms as a patient, but it was the first time I ever heard the idea that you could not mention medical marijuana in court. Guy has a card. I don't know, what are we talking about here? I mean, the only reason he has marijuana in the system is because
you told him it was okay for him to have it in his system. You gave the guy a license.
Right. It said, here you go.
So this case was insane, to say the least. But it was early on, and a lot of dancing around the topic. But as my friend Carl Ebner, who I went to court with a lot of times, and he was very complex in his explanation of how this all worked. After 20 or 30 trips to court, I got it ironed down to a couple of things. He'd say, like, you see, Mike, they got these lab results here, and it's just a number. It doesn't even have a decimal point, like 9 nanograms of THC and 40 nanograms of carboxy THC.
The non-controlled substance.
Which is not a controlled substance. It should be on the document. There's nothing to do with it. But he says, see, it's just, there's no decimal point here. That's not science. And he says, and there's no other number. I mean, the idea that they're asking these jurors, and this is the opening statement, is like, okay, so the state's going to ask you to come in here and sit and watch this shooting match. People are going to be shooting at the targets, and they're going to ask you to place a bet on who you think is going to win. Now, here's a question. When the state steps up and says, shoots at the target and says, ha, there's the bullseye, are you going to place your bet now? Or do you want to see him shoot again? Because the second shot could be through the roof, not even close to it. How do we know that that's the bullseye? Just because they say what time? Like they could never reproduce even within a percentage of error.
Of course not. It's the Michigan State Police Crime Lab. I mean, what do you expect?
40% budget. Used to test marijuana.
Yeah,
that's good. It's just so atrocious. With all the other crimes, and again, against the backdrop of all these untested rape kits, all this other work yet to be accomplished by the state lab.
Anything other than testing marijuana.
I think none of us are advocating for people to lose their jobs or for any of those things. If it happens as a natural result of law change, then that is just the way things go when you change society. But the fact is, we can do better, and we're advocating for a better way.
We didn't get through the sheriff yet, I don't think, entirely, but
we better hit it.
Hold on, wait. No, I was going to say, this whole thing started because he was complaining that they wouldn't be able to determine probable cause.
Right.
In other words, I mean, make an admission that probable cause doesn't exist, and I think it should.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
This is such a
what he's really saying is we won't have a case against you.
Because you don't drive bad enough for us to be able to easily prove it.
That's right.
This argument, by the way, while we've just obliterated it, we're back to where we were when we were making jokes of it. This argument, we all should realize, will have great impact on our legislature.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, when they take up some fucking shit in January, there will be some shit that is fucking per se or extra funding for DRE.
It's a coming. Oh, it's not going to be or. It's going to be both.
Oh, no. In fact, I'll tell you,
both.
At the marijuana law section, my dear friend and colleague, told me, tried to threaten me with like, oh, it's going to be both.
Yeah, it'll be both.
She doesn't know what she's talking about. But
I'm telling you.
Here's what they don't realize is that when legalization passes, that MMFLA tax that funds local police agencies and stuff like that, that's going to disappear immediately. The 3% tax goes away and is no longer collected once the 10% rec tax comes in. So the funding for police agencies that they're counting on from the medical program disappears right about January 2020.
That's unfortunate.
So at this,
what program funding the MMFLA right now?
The MMFLA includes a 3% tax, and part of that 3% tax is earmarked to go to specifically to fund law enforcement. But as soon as legalization comes in, the medical tax goes away. So that funding source for law enforcement and for MCOLES, the Commission on Law Enforcement Standards, who trains cops, that funding goes away too. So our legalization program eliminates those revenue sources for cops. They hate it.
Yeah.
They hate it.
I'm happy to even pay extra taxes for our law enforcement if they will focus on real crime.
I vote for villages to support law enforcement every time they come up in my local community.
Absolutely.
Whether I was in Warren, whether I was in Centerline or Troy, living in Flint Township, back in I've lived in Saginaw, I've lived in a lot of places. I always support law enforcement with my vote when it comes to giving them money, because we need new police cruisers. You have to have updated radio equipment, bulletproof vests. I support all of that. But what I don't want to do is give my cannabis tax dollars to law enforcement if law enforcement are going to continue to enforce drug war style terrorist tactics on people, especially even for minor violations. Michael, we've been talking about minor violations of the MMMA since 2012, 2013 on this show. And the fact that we don't need to have terrorist SWAT-style raid tactics for a place where you expect someone, instead of growing 12 plants, is growing 20 plants. It's what we've seen is an escalation of anger towards medical cannabis patients. And this is what it looks like when you take a toy away from a boy, right? He's not happy about it. He fights about it. He wants that toy back, and he'll try and sneak a chance at it every time he can. So when you tell a law enforcement official they cannot raid people just because they're smoking pot, they get pissed and they keep trying to do it anyway.
Let me draw this together. This thing, I've decided, this thing from Bubbles, the sheriff over here, is one thing and one thing only. It is that it is an announcement that we don't give a shit what law you passed. It's like the way it was described at the very beginning. You look at the way law enforcement is doing this thing. Oh, you want us to enforce this law you passed? Okay. Now, mind you, we liked it the way it was before, but thanks for putting us in charge here. We're the wolves, and that's the chicken coop right there. We're just gonna sit guard here tonight.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I mean, that's what happened before. Unfortunately, that's what this is. How do you stop this? When the law presumes the search warrant's valid, and the magistrate isn't a lawyer.
You change the leadership at the top of the state, from the Attorney General's office and the gubernatorial office and the leadership in the legislature, so that when attorneys like yourself see a better way for justice to be served, you can effectuate that idea through your legislative partners, instead of bringing an idea to the legislature and being greeted by derision and being treated as if you're a lesser person. Now that we have an opportunity to get a more friendly leadership installed in Michigan's government, perhaps we can finally effectuate some of the changes we've been talking about for a very long time.
I will say that, listen, you know how I feel about all that. I question, though, just on a general scale, the uniformity by which this really happens. You know what I mean? Because I do think that as much as there's a state police and state law and state enforcement of officers that are sworn to the state police and posts throughout, you still have county sheriffs that are their own political animals. They've got their own departments, their own jails, their own...
Justice is not uniform across the state.
In Grand Rapids, King County, in other courts, I'll hear that too. The judges will say, like, counsel, I don't have any authority over the sheriff. I can't make him let your client out, even though I ordered your client to only be in for, okay, this is what I do, counsel. I'm going to send your client, blah, 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 into this, blah, 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 where they're in jail. We had this happen. And your client will be taken into this particular drug program, blah, 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 at the sheriff's. And because of that, I'm not going to give her work release or whatever. So then, sure enough, she doesn't get into the program that the court wants her to get into.
Not because the judge decided, but
the
because the sheriff decided.
The
sheriff decided no, so they didn't happen.
Right. So, and the response was, that's not my field of authority. The sheriff runs the jail. Think about that.
Isn't the attorney general the one that would be able to send a directive to all prosecutors or all judges across the state to say this is the standard by which you have to conduct yourself, and reestablish those bright lines? I mean, that would be the office that command would have to come from, right?
Well, this is the benefit of the attorney general that is significant, far and beyond the other government positions. It's because the attorney general has the authority to write opinions that are not binding in any court anywhere, but they are binding upon the agencies. Okay? Mm-hmm. So, like, if they write a directive or opinion of something, the Michigan State Police would have to follow it.
And so with Child Protective Services, who is an agency.
For Child Protective Services or,
Bethany Christian.
Whatever it may be, you could see that happening. Any place that the agencies that would be operating under the state, the authority of, budgeted.
Like even Department of Treasury, right? I mean, that's a department of the state.
Yes, I would think so. I mean, she can write to the extent that she's got the authority. Yeah, I mean, there may be an upheaval, but that's really the point. The point is they can write attorney general opinions that are binding on the agencies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a limitation to it. It is an executive authority that controls the agencies,
mm-hmm.
which all exist out of the. Is that right? Do they all exist out of the executive branch?
I don't know.
State departments, or what?
Jeff, is that true? Are all of the state agencies? What do you think about that? Are all the state agencies a branch of or associated with the executive branch?
Yes. Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
And law enforcement is taxed as it is, and for the public to expect us to be able to know every single nuance and enforce every single nuance of this new recreational law is going to be very, very challenging for us.
Stop right there.
They don't need to know the law?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, we have to learn
it's going to be tough for us to learn, so don't make us learn something. Oh, my gracious. We don't have understanding all the subtleties and the nuances of this law is going to be very difficult for us. That's the same shit they said when the medical law came in, and now they claim they're the only people that clearly know what the law says.
25, at least 25 times I've asked a police officer on the witness stand if they've ever read the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, and they've said no, or the whole thing, or maybe one time, but not. I couldn't tell you what it says. So what I'm trying to understand from you then, with that being your answer, that the law that my client is relying upon to exonerate them by immunity or affirmative defense, you say that you have no knowledge of it whatsoever.
I just do what my supervisor tells me. Rocco read the law. I'm sure Rocco knows.
This is a cry. It's either a cry for, it's actually like a fuck you. Yeah. It's really like a fucking forget this shit, Rick. It's not even. It's interesting now listening to it like a second or third time, the layer in here. It is them telling us, we don't give a shit what the fuck you do. We're going to keep pounding your fucking head in the ground because these are all the same. We don't know the law. We're not going to understand. It's too difficult to understand. A lot of nuances.
It's difficult.
911 sends us on mental health calls. We don't want to learn the tough law.
Oh.
I mean, there may be some budgetary things. We may have to add people because it's so difficult.
Yeah.
So, Michael, wow, really thin arguments, right? I mean, we're listening to this guy. We're breaking it down. He hasn't really listed one negative thing about cannabis. All he's talked about is how difficult his life is going to become.
Yeah, poor guy.
You get salary.
But the point really is that he's not supposed to.
Right.
The sense of smell of marijuana alone shouldn't cause them to go out to the house to investigate.
Right.
A tip that my neighbor's house smells like marijuana shouldn't cause that. Mm-hmm. If they say there's heavy traffic and people pulling up at night and day, buying, and people walking out with trees and whatnot, maybe
there's an investigation.
Maybe they start an investigation to corroborate that and set up some surveillance or something like that. I would never admit that'd be enough, but something to that effect. But it's clearly we've got to begin to.
But some local communities, I think my neighbor's smoking pot. That's a big day for them, right? I mean, these are guys that chase down, in some of these smaller communities that don't have any crime at all. They over pursue these things because of, I hate to say it, but boredom.
It's easy pickings.
Doesn't it seem like that sometimes to you? You deal with a lot of this stuff.
Look, it is unequivocally a. I think you guys know what the area that I'm talking about, but up there in Grayling and Gaylord area, they've got this. That's like they got extra forces out. I remember one of the prosecutors describing it as like
the gauntlet,
the wolf pack. They're not super trained like I'd call like the jaguars or the cheetahs. But this is like the wolf pack. These guys, and he was
They pull people out of